is our Northeast District pesticide inspector from the North Dakota Department of Ag. And good morning, Andy, and welcome. And you want to introduce yourself a little bit to our growers this morning?
I'm Andy Erickson. I don't know if any of you guys have bumped into me, but I'm coming from the beautiful confines of my kitchen table because my office is under renovation. But I've been with the department for 7 years now. It'll be 7 years, April 1st. So
let's talk about everyone's favorite. Reading those pesticide labels can be daunting. What advice do you have for our applicators this morning when it comes to proper interpretation of labels and getting through and reading that label?
Well, I would drink coffee before you start reading them. But the biggest thing you really want to do is, first off, look at the label language. See if it is mandatory or advisory. So what do I mean by that? Is the label telling you something that you have to do, or is it recommending you do it? So if it's telling you something that is mandatory, you'll see things like must, do this, do not do this. Advisory will be may, shall, recommend. So if you're looking to be in compliance, you want to look at what is actually mandatory. And then you can try to break down the label. Every label will be set up very similarly. So you'll have the very front label where it says what the product is, active ingredients, signal words on the front. And then you'll dive into it and you'll see first aid information on the back of that. After that, you'll see personal protective equipment that's required by the label. And the more you move down, you'll find things like weather data, and you also find your rates that you need, any tank mix partners, anything like that. But really look at what you're trying to get out of the label when you're going to look at it. So if you're looking for the rate, you'll want to look at that. And we'll actually have a website that helps you really break down the label too. That will be in my slide coming up. There'll be a resource that you can use. So if you're just looking for what crop can I use this pesticide on, or weeds, anything like that, there will be resources there to make it a lot easier to break down a label.
Okay, and I want everyone to pay attention to this question because I think you're going to be asked this in Turning Point. All my favorite teachers in grade school used to say that before a question and they knew I was going to be on a test. So I'm going to let you know now. Keeping records of pesticide applications is essential for the proper pesticide management. And can you cover what is required to be recorded and the time frame in which that application needs to be recorded?
Yes, so as private applicators, you guys are required to keep records on restricted use products and also fumigants if you are certified to use fumigants. Now, if you fall under the worker protection standard, you need to keep records on everything. But when you are keeping records, what you must keep records on, first off, you need to have the name of the applicator with the certification number, and you also have the signature of the applicator. Now, you'll also want to make sure you're keeping track of the wind speed, wind direction, the temperature, and also you'll need to keep records of any buffers. So if you do have a label that requires a buffer, you need to keep a record of what that buffer is, how big that buffer is, what the buffer consists of. So that can be just a quick little note that you can make. For those of you that keep digital records, make sure your digital records have those also in there, and make sure you are completing those records within 24 hours after the application. So, if you're all concerned about getting your records done right away, you can do it at the end of the day. Just make sure they're done within 24 hours of the application. And also, this is where we'll go back to labels. You also want to check with your label if there's any additional information that you need to keep track of. So when we jump into like our dicambas, things like that, it is a little bit different because then you start jumping into keeping records of the sensitive crop registry. You'll also need to take the wind speed, temperature at the beginning and end of your application. So that's a little bit more involved for those of you that are going to use dicamba over the top on soybeans. Okay. And if you're going to use those products, you'll want to make sure you also have your auxin training number that you're required to have to use those dicamba products. So that'd be for XtendiMax, Ingenia, and Tavium. Okay, and the same thing goes, I know we might jump ahead a little bit here, but the same thing goes with Paraquat too. So you guys are a heavy edible bean area, so I can guarantee a lot of you use Paraquat. Now, something that has changed for you guys that use Paraquat is you do need to take additional training. Okay, we will have that website at the end. So if you are going to use Paraquat, you need to not only be certified through the state, but you also need to have the certification. And you'll have to have a record of that. And that will go on your record form too. You'll have to fill that in because you'll get a certificate and it should have a number on it. And then that's good for 3 years, that training. So I know that kind of jumps ahead with a little bit of record keeping, but I know that's one that's been missed because they just started it in June of 2019 with the Paraquat additional training requirements. So I guess the only other thing I can think of is location of the field too, is you also need to have that. So the legal description of the land that you're making a pesticide application.
One question that I kind of get often, Andy and Angie, I need to do my yearly Dicamba training, and that's not run through the NDSU Extension Service. Can you talk a little bit about that process with growers? How that certification is handled differently versus this certification that they're sitting in today?
Yes, the Dicamba related one is required federally. Okay, so it goes beyond just the state, and then it's put on by the chemical companies that make these products. So you'll see like the XtendiMax, Ingenia, what have you. And that was just something they felt that applicators federally needed more information, more training on if you're going to use those products. And that training is required every single year. So I hope I answered your question on that as far as how it differs. NDSU doesn't have anything to do with that training or the Department of Agriculture, but it is something that is required.
No, that's great, Andy. I appreciate you bringing that up. And kind of following up, can you talk? We have a lot of new applicators that are on with us this morning, and they've been in contact with me. You're not done today, you new applicators. You get that exciting privilege of taking a 30-question exam with me, but open book at sometime in March. But do you want to talk about, Andy, the inspection process? So when you're out and about through your region, what compliances are you looking for that applicators must have when making a pesticide application?
Well, I'm glad that you asked that. So how will you know, first off, if I am going to be doing a use inspection? So my work vehicle is a white Dodge Durango. So if you see that pull up to the field, what do? You panic and run, right? No. So what we'll do, it's completely random. I'm not picking on you if you're lucky enough to see me this summer. So what I will be looking for and the things that I see missed the most, one of the biggest violations that I have, and the most common violations, would have to deal with weather, especially for you new applicators. If you are working for somebody, even if your boss is telling you to spray, and let's say it's 25-mile-an-hour winds, you cannot be spraying if it's not labeled for those conditions. So weather conditions are probably the most common violation that I do write. And it goes both ways. I've also written weather violations when it is not enough wind. So on certain labels, you'll see that it will tell you do not spray in winds less than 3 miles an hour. For instance, with your dicambas or Roundup. Roundup is 3 to 10 miles an hour. Do not spray in any wind under 3 miles an hour. Now, the other things you'll need if I'm doing a use inspection is make sure you're wearing your proper PPE, so your personal protective equipment. You'll find that on the label. Now, if you have a tank mix, especially for you new guys that aren't used to using pesticides, you'll want to make sure that you are looking at each label in the tank mix, and whichever one requires the most PPE and is the most restrictive, that is the one that needs to be followed. Okay. So other things that you'll need is I'll check for application records, which, remember, if they're not completed at the site, that's okay. You have 24 hours to complete them. So remember that. What else I'll be looking for is container disposal. So make sure that you are disposing of your empty pesticide jugs properly. So as private guys, you guys have one additional way to get rid of your pesticide containers that commercial guys don't. You're allowed to burn 1 day's worth of pesticide containers. So whether you're going to burn them, throw them away, or recycle them, make sure that they are triple rinsed and puncture holes in them before you do any of them, whether you're burning them or not. So you want to make sure all the chemicals out of that. So the other thing I'm going to make sure you have with you is your labels. So make sure you have the labels for whatever pesticides you are using that particular day. So if you're doing a, Roundup and, Extendamax mix, you'd want to make sure you have your Extendamax label and your Roundup label with you. That way, if people, if you get exposed to any pesticides, you have the first aid information on hand with you. Otherwise, it sounds like a lot of stuff. The whole process usually takes 10 minutes, especially if everybody is in compliance. So, and usually we have pretty good compliance. Like I said, it's weather that's usually the biggest culprit. And then the next one would be not wearing the proper personal protective equipment.
That's great. So you're talking about weather with the wind speed. And when someone has a drift complaint or concern, do they call you, or what does that process look like?
You can call me if you're not quite sure how the whole process is, because I doubt that come June or July, you'll remember everything that I said here, but we'll go through from beginning to end what the process will entail. So last year, they rolled out a new way of filing a drift complaint with the department. They're doing it online, which is on our department's website. You'll see a box, and I know they put it right on the front page during youth season to file a pesticide complaint. So when you click on that, you'll get a nice long page of information that states what the process entails. So after you agree to all those terms, you'll go on to fill out the pesticide complaint form. So on that form, you'll put the legal description of where the applicate or the damage occurred. And you'll also put what the damage consists of. So you'll be able to write that out in your own words. It makes it very clear and concise. And then that will get bumped down to me after you submit it. It'll go to Bismarck. Bismarck will see that. In this case, it's Steele County. Okay, that's my area. It gets bumped to me. Then I will contact you. Then what I will do at that point is we will meet up and we'll go look at your field. Okay, now, because I'm a public employee, same thing with your NDSU extension agents, we cannot tell you that it is drift. However, what I am going to do is make sure, hold on, we had a question that just popped up in that.
Yeah, no worries. We'll cover that. You go ahead and talk through your process.
Yeah, no, so, well, no, it just got me off topic here, but okay, so we'll go out to your field and I'll examine the drift. So I'll take pictures, I'll interview you, have you fill out a voluntary statement form. Obviously, if you don't want to, it is voluntary. And I will also take samples. So the samples will be dictated by what kind of, issues we're seeing. So it could be a soil sample, vegetation sample, swab sample. Especially swab samples are common if it is a human endangerment case, swab an area usually. But so at that point, I will freeze the samples and they will get sent down to, usually it's South Dakota that we go through for our lab. We do not have a state-run lab. And we usually try to get a turnaround as quickly as possible, but most complaints will take 60 to 90 days for a full completion. Now, what else I'll also do is I'll contact the applicators that you may have been drifted on by, and I'll interview them too and get records and all that stuff. Now, during this whole process, I can't share any information with either party. Even after the case is closed, you will get a letter from the department stating whether a violation occurred. Okay, because that's what our whole process is looking for, is if any part of the pesticide law was broken, whether it's drift, misuse, off target, that's what we're looking for. So we do not have anything to do with the civil side of it. So if you are looking for reimbursement from the person that you allege the damage against, it's probably be a good idea for you to collect your own samples too on top of the samples that we took, because I can't tell you what we found in the samples. Okay, so if you're wanting to find out right away, you'd have to collect your own samples, and then obviously you can use those in your civil reimbursement case. And file anything civilly, you do have to contact the applicator by certified mail within 28 days that you first knew of the damage or before 20% of the crop is harvested. And at that point, once you contact the applicator, they are permitted to bring up to 4 representatives to observe the damage. So, and if you don't permit that, then you'd be barred from making a claim against the applicator.
I'm so glad you could share that, Andy, because Abby and I couldn't be able to help a situation where there's suspected drift. And so it was really important that we shared that you shared that with us today, because it's you have to be careful and really go through the process that Andy talked about, starting with that, going through the North Dakota Department of Agriculture. And there's a really good question, and Jason beat me to the punchline here. So a question that I was going to ask, do you need a hard copy of the label with you, or can you access it on your phone? If, Andy, let's say you're out doing an inspection and you need to see that label, can it be on the applicator's phone?
Yep, that's fine, whether it's on their phone or iPad. However, it must already be downloaded and available to use. So if you guys have any locks or anything like that on your devices, fingerprints, stuff like that, you'd have to make sure that people can access your phone. That doesn't mean I'm going to rip your phone out of your hand and be like, nope, I got to see this, but I'm not going to let you look up the pesticide label at that time. Make sure it's already downloaded. You can be like, yep, I'm spraying Roundup today and XtendiMax. But it just has to be easily accessible, and it has to be accessible right now, and right there and right now. So, and the nice thing, if you are doing the online label, is for sure you're getting the most updated label information too. So
I have a follow-up question for Angie then. We talked about PPE or personal protective equipment, and it's not, how does an applicator know what equipment they need and when it's needed for handling pesticides?
That's a really great question. And I knew you would ask me that as the Farm and Ranch Safety Coordinator for NDSU. But like Andrew alluded to earlier, that label is going to tell you exactly the personal protective equipment, or otherwise known as PPE, that you need to be wearing when you're not only applying, but especially when you're handling that pesticide and that product. And so really the label is going to tell you. And like Andy mentioned, which is such a great point, when you're working with tank mixes, you've got to read those labels as well, because the label that has the most restrictive PPE requirement, that's the PPE that you need to have on, regardless if another label says, if it just says long sleeves and gloves. If there's another product that you're putting on that, let's say, for example, it says the whole Tyvek suit, which is very rare, but does happen, you need to use that most restrictive PPE label. And so that's a really great question. It's all in the label. Looks like we've got another label question coming in, and somebody has asked, Andy, is the label on the product container enough? Is that enough if you were to come and really not just do an inspection? You should have this regardless if Andy's going to make a stop in your field, but is that product or that label right on the product, is that enough if you do stop?
Yes, that would be enough. Now, I think part of the reason you're asking that question too is if you have the jug on your water truck. And if the water truck's out at the field with you, that is fine. However, there will come a point where that water truck's going to have to go refill with water. Now, if you're leaving with the water truck and following them at all times, that is fine. And you can also take the label from that if you have an empty jug that's all done, you can take that label and have that label in the sprayer with you. Or if it's easier for you too, you can print them off online if you like the hard copy. That's fine too. I know I have some applicators that they have a spray plan before the season starts, and they'll print out all the labels, have them in a binder, and then they put markers you know, so they'll have the pages marked on whatever they're applying that particular day. So as long as you have some copy of the label, we will be good to go.
So Andy, kind of a common question that I'll get from time to time is, how does an applicator need to look at standing water when it comes to pesticide application? So let's say it just rained, and so we've got, you know, that standing sheet water versus sloughs and puddling. Do you want to kind of wade us through the weeds on that one, so to say, when it comes to water and spray applications?
Yes, you know, I hate to sound redundant, but obviously you'll have to look at the label and see what it does, because it will lots of times talk about if sheet water is permitted or anything like, you know, anything like that. However, usually in most cases, if it is sheet water, you know, that's considered differently than if it is a wetland or temporary wetland or, you know, a lake. You know, obviously you're never going to find a situation where you're allowed to apply over a lake or a wetland, but the sheet water, you know, in a lot of cases you'll find where, depending on the label, it may permit that. But a lot of times if there's any water now, for the most part, with most labels, it will say do not apply. And especially you guys with really thick soils and that don't drain well, you're probably not going to be out there anyways, because you'll probably get the sprayer stuck. But it is a big deal though with water, because we have seen an uptick in pesticides getting into water. In some cases, we don't even know, with certain products that we've seen, we don't even know exactly where they're coming from in certain areas. But the one, especially with you corn guys, that we are finding in water that is still an issue and remains in high levels is atrazine. And with atrazine, you have such a long half-life that it takes forever for that stuff to break down. So, you know, who knows where all the atrazine is coming from, because I know less and less corn guys are using it. There isn't as much being purchased and applied as we've seen in the past. However, it is still getting into our water.
So I have another question that's kind of specific, you know, and I work with a lot of farmers who have bee boxes, right? Because we're a big honey producing state. And what does an applicator need to do or consider when doing a pesticide application by bee boxes?
Bee boxes really come into play for the applicator when you guys are starting to do your insecticide applications. So what you'll need to do before you make an insecticide application, you'll need to basically do a 2-mile circle around your field, and any of the bee boxes or any of the hive owners in that 2-mile radius, you will need to contact before you make an insecticide application. Now, I know it comes up a lot of times where, you know, I can't get a hold of the guy or they're not cooperating. Even if they don't want to move them, you know, obviously if they're not on your property, you know, if they don't want to move them, you cannot, you still can't drift onto the bees. However, an easy thing that we have that makes it a lot easier to get a hold of the bee guys, and make sure I'd get a lot of this in writing. So texting or emailing is fantastic when you're getting a hold of some of these bee guys, because then you have things in writing, you have it concrete on what they said. But we do have a bee map that's available on our department's website that not only shows where hive owners are, but it shows organic farmers, vineyards, towers, and it has all the information for the hive, to contact the hive owners. You guys, applicators, can register on there, so then you are able to put in application. If you're going to make an application, and you'll set that watch area so you can do it to 2 miles out from your field, and it will show if each of those bee guys, if they got the notification, if they're set up to receive notifications from our website. And if they're not, then you'd have to call them. But make sure you contact them at least 24 hours before an insecticide application.
I'm glad you brought that up, because we actually do. We have a pretty large apiary by Sharon, and so we do need to be cognizant and aware of, you know, where those bee boxes are at, and have that really good communication with those producers as well.
I would like to cover one thing that I think is important to cover, especially with as many participants as we have today, is WPS, which is Worker Protection Standard. So I'll briefly touch on this. This will cover cover you as a farmer if you have non-immediate family members working for you. So you'll know if you fall under WPS if you have non-immediate family members. What's considered immediate family members is a spouse, first cousins, kids, aunts, uncles, things of that nature would be considered immediate family member. If those are the only people you have working for your farm, great, you don't have to fall under WPS. But if you do have hired hands that are not immediate family members, a couple things that you'll have to keep track of is you'll need to keep a record of every application you make. You'll need to post that record at a central posting area that all your employees know of for at least 30 days after the REI, the restricted entry interval, expires. So if you have an REI on a product of 24 hours, it'd be 30 days after that expires. Okay, so every application you'll have to keep a record on. You'll also have to make sure you do annual training, which we'll have a website coming up here that has everything you need to do annual training with your employees to be in compliance. And you also have additional respirator training if you do need to use a respirator. That will include a fit test by a medical professional and I should say a medical test by, make sure you're healthy enough to wear a respirator, fit test, and then also make sure there's training on the respirator. So the easiest thing to do is maybe you have one person that is available for, to use the respirator instead of getting everybody trained in on it. And you'll see right there, that is where the guide to the worker protection standard, the pesticideresources.org, has everything you need to know, especially if you're not sure if you fall under WPS. And that's the biggest thing I can tell people is if you're not sure, give me a call. You can ask me questions on that. Or if you're not sure if you're in compliance with it, we can do a walk through your farm and make sure you are in compliance. You don't want to be in a position, I've only had this happen once in 7 years now, but we did have a pesticide issue where an employee did come into contact with pesticides, and it kind of became a little bit of a mess because in this case, they were supposed to be following the worker protection standard guidelines, and in this particular case, they were not. And if it's a bad enough case, then the EPA can get involved, and we don't want to see it happen, but overall, as a whole, everybody is doing a pretty good job, and you're following a lot more of the WPS than you even understand. Especially for you new guys, I'm going to throw this out there for you new guys really quick as we have a winding down. Is one thing you do need is a decontamination kit that will fall under WPS. So liquid soap, single-use towels like paper towels, fresh water, and an eye wash, and then a change of clothes or Tyvek suit. I bet you that might end up on the test too.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because actually a few years ago, and Abby, I didn't even get a chance to tell you about this, but a few years ago, one of our local 4-H clubs and one of our leaders is on now, the club did a farm safety lesson and put together spill kits for our private applicators. So some of you applicators may have received those at our previous trainings that we've had in the past. And so that's a great point to bring up about those decontamination kits. And Andy, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us.